Sorry?
So we've got Hello everyone. Hello everyone. Is that working? Can everyone hear me? Great. I'm really sorry that there aren't quite enough chairs for everyone. I don't think we were expecting it to be this popular at 10 o'clock on the Monday morning, but delighted to see you all here. Apologies about the slight late start. We thought we'd prioritise getting everyone a drink beforehand. So welcome to this event hosted by IPPR and sponsored by the Healthy Air Coalition on clearing the air, accelerating the transition to decarbonised transport. I'm not going to talk for very long. I'm not who you're here to see. But I'm really delighted to welcome my panel. So we have Lee Waters, member of the Senate, who's the Deputy Minister for Climate Change. We have Hirra Khan Adeogun, who is the co-director for campaigns and impact at Possible. We have Sarah Woolnough, who's the chair of the Healthy Air Coalition. And we have Seb Dance, who's the Deputy Mayor for Transport and the Deputy Chair of Transport for London. We're going to kick off with each of the panellists doing a short intro, just 4 minutes, on this topic. And then I will take chair's privilege and ask a few questions. And then we'll open up to the floor so you all can ask some questions as well. And we'll be finishing up at 11:30. So, without further ado, I'm going to hand over to you, Lee, to kick us off. Sorry, got you with a mouthful.
Okay, does this one work as well? Yes, it does. Hi, good morning, everybody. So I am. My title is slightly misleading because I am Deputy Minister for Climate Change. But in Wales, we've put the main emitters of climate into one department, which is a climate change department. But that also includes transport, which I lead on. Planning, housing, regeneration, environment, I think that's it, it's a lot, into one place to try and get some synergies and some crossovers. It's not easy, but I think the principle is the right one. So we're looking at transport very much through a climate lens. We have set a strategy which puts modal shift at the heart of what we're trying to do. To remind myself of the target, I never remember targets. So we've got a target to switch the number of trips by sustainable modes from the current 32% to 45% by 2040. Now that is clearly a very ambitious shift. It's not enough, it's not sufficient to meet our net zero targets, but given the trajectory of transport emissions and growth of car use, that is a very significant change of direction, which is not going to be easy to pull off. So we've scanned the horizon to look at what systemic structural barriers there are to shifting that direction of travel. We have had a roads review, so we've paused our road schemes. We have reviewed them against our climate targets. We've set up a very impressive roads review panel led by Lynn Sloman, who's gone through each of the 50-odd schemes we had in various stages of development and judged whether or not they should go ahead based on a set of criteria. So we say we're not banning roads, as the Tories are trying to claim, but we are raising the bar for when a new road is the right answer to a local transport problem. So roads that simply increase roads capacity and are not consistent with our climate goals. And where we do need changes, we need to look at the lowest carbon impact. So for example, a lot of safety schemes are justified on the grounds that you can't travel safely at 60 miles an hour on a stretch of road, and therefore they will spend 30 million on a flyover or road widening, and actually saying, well, in that example, just lower the speed. Why spend all that money and all that carbon? Just lower the speed and make smaller changes. So that's you can happy to talk more about the roads review, but that's one thing we've done. We've had now for 10 years this year an Active Travel Act, which places a duty on all local authorities to develop routes for walkers and cyclists and to have a long-term pipeline of schemes. And we've this year got the highest spend per head in the UK, £23 per head on active travel. We've got a big bus reform bill that we're taking through next year to have re-regulation of the buses, so we can have a proper plan system with integration between rail and bus, and we've got a huge investment into the metro and the rail system as well. So I think strategically we are heading in a very clear direction. As ever in politics and in an era of austerity, there are some quite severe crosswinds which are making things difficult for us. The whole privatised model of bus and train is not fit for purpose to meet the climate challenge. It's almost impossible to make that work strategically, given the leaks there are in the system. So we're trying to put that right, but that's a big, I think, issue for an incoming Labour government to fix the wiring on that. We're also passing a clean air bill, which was starting to go through the Senate this week. Our 20-mile-an-hour policy, which I'll finish on, as you might have heard about, is not specifically a clean air intervention because the evidence on 20 mile an hour for air quality is mixed. But the big advantage of it is the increase it has in active travel. So we know from London and elsewhere, the data is pretty clear that vulnerable road users are far more likely to have casualties reduced when speeds are lower and are therefore far more likely to walk and cycle and play out in their neighbourhood. So I think in terms of active travel and decarb, I think it's probably one of the biggest single interventions that we will make in terms of its efficacy. And that, I think, will have an overall impact on air quality.
Thank you very much, and perfect timing. I'm going to turn next to you, Seb, if that's okay. Here it is. Pass that one over. I think that one should be on.
Testing. Yes, it is. Great. Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for coming. And a bit like Lee, the kind of amalgamation of different policy areas in transport is the thing that I find most thrilling about the role that I do. It's also the most terrifying because so many different aspects of the mayor's policy agenda rest on transport. But of course, environment and air quality are so interlinked, and getting it right on transport is absolutely key to fighting both key challenges. Of course, air quality and climate are two sides of the same coin. You take action on one, you take action on the other. We have a very ambitious target in London. This isn't a one-upmanship or anything like that, but London is obviously more, it's easier to achieve these targets with the integrated transport system that we have and so on. But we have a target of 80% of all journeys by active and public transport by 2041, completely in keeping with your vision. This is exactly the kind of overarching goal that drives us every day in all of the decisions, all of the policies that we enact. And it's a really important guiding star, if you like, to have those targets so that you know that when you're enacting policy, you're aiming towards that strategic goal. Of course, we've also committed to ensuring that London is net zero by 2030. And we really do this because there is no option. The climate emergency, as we know, is already here. We are living with its consequences already. And of course, the effects of the emissions that were put into the atmosphere many, many years ago are now resulting in the impacts that we're seeing today, notwithstanding the effects of the emissions that we're putting out today, which of course we'll see in many, many years hence. But we can't achieve these important ambitions and this policy without equality and fairness really at the heart of decision making. And if we want to encourage more people, and this is really about encouraging people onto public transport and active transport options, it has to be accessible, it has to be reliable, and it has to be affordable. That's exactly what we're doing and taking action on in London. TfL has added over 1 million additional bus kilometres to the network. It's already the second biggest network. Shanghai has just pipped us there in the world in terms of bus fleet, but we are adding 1 million additional bus kilometres this year alone. And the Superloop, which I hope many of you have heard about, which is the new express routes that connect town centres around the periphery in outer London, really aiming to address an issue that has stemmed from the way transport's been planned traditionally, where you have a radial model, people travelling in and out of the city centre. Obviously, since the pandemic, which has really exacerbated trends that were happening anyway, people are travelling much more within town centres in outer London. So the Superloop is a really important part of building that network. That's 4 million additional bus kilometres every year that will be added when the Superloop is complete. We have 350 kilometres of cycleways, which is more than double the size of the network since 2018, and over 17,000 cycle parking spaces have also been added since 2019. So a real laser-like focus on increasing capacity, increasing availability, and therefore making the options more attractive to people and also more intuitive as well. Cycling levels are growing. Our data from 2022 shows that cycling levels were 13% higher than in 2019. That's still remarkable when you think that Londoners are travelling less now overall than they were pre-pandemic. And crucially, and this is very important, there are signs now that a much more diverse range of Londoners are taking up cycling as well. On fares, we froze all of the pay-as-you-go fares on TfL services for 4 years, and we only increased them when we had to in response to the funding deal set by the government in response to the pandemic. This has, we estimate, saved the average household over £200 every year, and fares are, of course, now lower than they otherwise would have been had the fare freeze not been in place. We've introduced the hopper fare, which enables people to take a bus more than once within an hour. 90 minutes, which obviously means that you can make unlimited bus and tram transfers. No, sorry, it is an hour. My bad, an hour. I should know that, really. 900 million bus journeys have now benefited from the hopper, and of course it then operates much more like a network, such as the Tube, for example, where obviously you wouldn't pay a separate fare when you change lines. The Mayor has protected concessions, including the over 60 scheme and that for children, which the government wanted us to water down during its funding negotiations. We have had to make some changes, obviously, in response to the government deal, but we have done a lot to protect the concession fares that we have. But this is really about equity. We know in London that people on lower incomes are far less likely to have access to a vehicle. Walking and cycling gives people a cheaper way to travel, but it also improves everybody's individual health, as well, of course, as tackling the air quality crisis that we have. And obviously, I cannot talk, and I'll end on this, on air quality without mentioning ULEZ extension, where, of course, we have done everything we can to provide additional support for people who need the most help. The scrappage scheme is targeted for those on the lowest incomes, those with disabilities, micro-businesses, charities from the start, and we wanted to ensure that we had sufficient funds before we extended it to everybody, every Londoner with a non-compliant vehicle, to ensure that those who needed the most support had it first. But look, there is a lot more to do. We understand the difficult decisions here. If there was a pain-free option, then frankly, obviously, everyone would be advocating for it. We wouldn't be having party conferences. We wouldn't have political differences. There is no pain-free option. There are difficult decisions at every turn on this. But we owe it to ourselves and we owe it to future generations to ensure we get this right.
Thank you very much. I'm going to turn now to Hirra.
Is this on? Okay. I'm going to do a slightly awkward thing and come over here where my laptop is, and my notes are all on here. Can everyone see me? Sorry. Hi. Okay. I've got 4 minutes, so I'll try and do this really quickly. So at Possible, we want to see a zero-carbon Britain built by and for everyone. And the level of traffic reduction we need to see over the next decade is unprecedented. And so to find the massive traffic cuts we need, we should obviously look to our cities, where population density should mean that providing affordable, efficient public transport is much easier, or that's the theory. So it's a good thing that I've spent the last 3 years heading up the Possible's Car-Free Cities campaign, or as the Daily Mail recently called it, plot. I'm going to very quickly summarize what we've learnt in hopefully less than 4 minutes. So the first thing is change is hard and opposition is inevitable. There are no examples of traffic reduction measures that we can find that did not experience intense opposition. Noisy backlash against traffic reduction is inevitable and universal regardless of the approach taken. So if you're finding it difficult, the Goodwin curve will let you know that that's normal. And this is where I was going to have a slide and you'd see the graph, but we don't have slides here. But I can maybe turn around my laptop at some point later and you can have a look at the graph. But the idea is, at first, a new idea is seen as ludicrous. And then people are won over in theory. You know, do you want to see traffic reduction? Yeah, that sounds like a good idea. But as soon as plans and details emerge, you know, what we'll do is we'll have ULEZ. Then there's loud opposition. Or what we'll have is LTNs. Then they're like, oh my God, what's happening here? But when people start enjoying the benefits of that change, the support then starts to grow over time. Opposition dissipates. So, I've spoken about LTNs. There's been quite the media frenzy about that. Poll after poll will show more support than opposition, but criticisms from few are loud and can be very, very hostile. But the thing is, modal filters, as used to create LTNs, are not new. We've been using them routinely since the 60s. So we've got over 60 years of evidence that they work. And so we surveyed over 300 households on streets with historic modal filters, and they were overwhelmingly popular. So people's views about traffic filters are not fixed. They trend towards greater support following lived experience with the change. And where the status quo is a filtered street, residents focus on the problems that would be caused if there were to change. So the point here is that change meets resistance, no matter the starting point. And we've been collecting stories of change from all around the world, and you can have a look at our website online. You'll find there's 25 case studies from all over the world, every single continent, when it comes to traffic reduction. They're basically following what's happening in the Goodwin curve, and that's initial fears about potentially negative impacts from traffic reduction prove unfounded. Once bedded in and the benefits have been realized, people don't want to go back. So what we need to see is political leaders who practice good communication, are courageous, tenacious, and see things through. Thank you very much. Number 2 are sticks are necessary, carrots make the sticks palatable. So I might break some hearts in the room here, but carrots alone do not work. Places like Estonia and Luxembourg have offered up free public transport. Lots of people take up that offer, but it tends to be those who've previously walked or cycled trips. The drivers are primarily staying in their cars, they're staying behind the wheel because you haven't disincentivized car use. So Paula Kuss and Kimberly A. Nicholas did this fantastic study published last year that analysed nearly 800 cases of successful traffic reduction in European cities. They came up with this list of 12 most effective measures, and surprise, surprise, the most effective measures disincentivise driving. That's congestion pricing, parking and traffic controls, low traffic neighbourhoods. But you also need to incentivize sustainable alternatives. But the key thing is address driving and parking reduction and restriction as an explicit goal, and then use the space and the money generated to expand and improve walking and wheeling, cycling, public transport infrastructure. And then I'm almost out of time, but I just wanted to say that we've worked in Birmingham, Bristol, Leeds, and London with communities, particularly those most harmed by the effects of mass car dominance, to co-design and deliver changes to their own streets. And we've encouraged and inspired local decision makers to raise ambitions and accelerate change in our cities. So we helped expand London's ULEZ, we helped introduce Birmingham's Clean Air Zone, we campaigned for better buses and school streets, which are now under threat because of this government. We helped 1,000 people cut their car use. We built parklets and inspired parklet permit processes and much, much more. So all of that to say change is difficult, but it's happening right now in small ways that, collectively lead to big transformations. Thank you.
You're all making my job very easy because you're right on time. Over to you, Sarah.
Thank you very much. So I'm Sarah. I'm here today representing the Healthy Air Coalition, and we are a coalition of 26 organisations, charities, NGOs in the health sector, energy, transport, but with a very clear goal to campaign and achieve cleaner air for all, everyone with the right to breathe clean air wherever they may live. So I'm going to give you just a couple of minutes on I think, the health aspects of this debate and some of the insight we hear from people every day. Because my other hat is I'm the Chief Executive of Asthma and Lung UK, and we campaign for, look after, represent the millions, about 7 million people with chronic lung conditions. I've been doing the job for 3 years, and one of the biggest shocks and surprises to me is just how impacted people, particularly vulnerable people with chronic lung conditions, are by toxic air. So about 2/3 of people with a long-term lung condition will talk about the negative impact of air pollution and toxic air on their health. about 43% of people that we surveyed in one of our recent reports with asthma, so that's over 3 million people, talked about toxic air leading to exacerbations, flare-ups, asthma attacks. So what's the Healthy Air Coalition about? What do we want? Well, we want to make a very bold health case for cleaning up our air and decarbonising transport. We want bolder action, and to follow nicely from Hirra, when we go out and talk to people, we know how popular these measures can be if they are seen to be done fairly with sufficient financial support, and I think that's key. So, a word more then about the health impacts. The health evidence is well documented, but we did publish a report a couple of years ago called The Invisible Threat. And I think it's still the case that out there in the public, we often say you wouldn't drink a glass of dirty water, but yet you're breathing toxic air. You don't see it, and it is sometimes harder to really kind of cut through and make the case very clearly to people. 43,000 premature deaths on account of breathing toxic air, strong links to cancer and heart disease and stroke and dementia and mental health impacts, stunting the growth of children's lungs. It's a huge environmental threat to health that hasn't been taken as seriously as it should do. So one of the things the Healthy Air Coalition is about is raising awareness and making this a debate as sort of absolutely in the mainstream, which of course it increasingly is. At Asthma and Lung UK, we've published a whole series of reports mapping levels of pollutants to particularly areas where people have no choice but to go to. So hospitals, maternity units, GP surgeries, care homes, schools. And we find a very sobering picture that the vast majority of schools in the country will breach latest WHO air quality guidelines. A baby is born every 2 minutes into toxic air. And we then see the lifelong impacts as very well documented by the Chief Medical Officer, Chris Whitty, in his annual report last year. So there's a huge health burden. Point number one. Point number two, what do we want to do about it? Well, we would like to see bolder clean air laws. We do have legislation with the Environment Act that's gone through. We want to see a Labour government commit to bolder clean air laws. We do know there's no silver bullet, I think, as we've discussed, but we also know that clean air zones of varying natures make a positive difference. They work. And so we are very supportive of more action in this area. There was data out last week looking at Bradford, well, actually looking at a number of different cities, relatively recently introduced a clean air zone, showing the lowest ever levels of pollutants in the air. And you see in London, levels of pollutants declining. You see in Manchester, levels of NO2 increasing. There is clear evidence, and I simplify for time constraints, but there's clear evidence that clean air zones work. You're taking the most polluting vehicles off the road. It makes a difference. A final point is we need broader action to clean up our air and decarbonise as well. We published a report last year alerting the nation, and what we found was really high levels of support, public support for more investment in public transport and for help to take more individual level action. But financial constraints were highlighted as a major barrier. So people say that they're wanting to either take more active travel options or potentially think about changing their car. Finance is often a barrier, and that's why, as Asthma and Lung UK and supported by the Healthy Air Coalition, we're calling for a fund which helps people to make this fair transition, a scrappage scheme to make this fair transition to cleaner transport. In the interest of time, I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you all very much. We had a good range there of scales. I feel like we talked about a sort of Wales's sort of national strategy. We had the more sort of the London-wide strategy, and then what you were talking about was much more local. And I wonder, and then obviously the health impacts range across all of those. And I wonder if, a bit of a tricky question, or maybe you'll all, sit with where you were, but I wonder what you think the priority for a Labour government should be on tackling transport emissions. Would you say they need to start, I mean, I guess ideally you do all of them, but where would you start? Would you start with the sort of big approach that Wales has taken, or would you zoom in a little bit smaller and look more at sort of clean air zones on an urban area? And I'm going to open it up to, do you want to kick us off?
So I was a journalist, and then I went to work for Sustrans, and it was an interesting experience because my immediate insight working for Sustrans was that you can do as many little schemes as you like, and they're great, and people like them, but they're a pinprick of the impact that we need to make. So my focus since then has been about how do we change the systems and the structures? How do we change the wiring? Because the wiring we have is biased towards car-based policies. And so you can fanny around the edges as much as you like, but unless you get in there and change that, you're not going to get the long-term change that we need to see.
Thank you very much.
And I absolutely agree with you, Lee. I feel like with LTNs, they're a tiny, tiny thing, actually. And I think the councils who decide that they don't want to implement LTNs, at this point, you're just kind of screwing your own residents over, really. But that's not going to get us the traffic reduction we need to see. What I would love to see from the Labour government is just being very, very explicit that we need a national traffic reduction target. It's not something that this government has been honest about. There's still this desire that EVs are going to save us all. EVs are not going to save us all. We have to reduce car use. And then, something that, there's a big contest going on here as to the local, should this happen on the local level, should this happen on the national level when it comes to road user charging or pay-as-you-drive schemes. Now, I would love for the national government to make an announcement that they have an intention to introduce national road user charging schemes, because that way it gives local governments the support that they need. If every little city or every little area is doing their own thing, it means that you kind of get double the friction almost in every, not double, however many hundreds of little frictions everywhere. Whereas if it's coming from national government, then the local governments feel like they have the support and they're galvanized to be able to be like, right, it's coming from national government, we can start trialing it, start testing it, start introducing it. But like I said in my talk, it's really, really important that those road user charging schemes, the revenue goes into public transport and specifically buses. Our buses are so underfunded, crumbling, in fact. And I just don't, and I think, if we're being realistic, it is the buses that will really drive our cities, really drive our economies. And it is the poorest in our communities who currently rely on buses. And every time there's a bus cut, they are the ones who suffer, really. And then the other thing that I would like to see, again, I'd like to see this on a national level. I think on most roads, on all roads, there should be space for safe cycling, really, or e-scooter use and e-bike use, because what that does, even for rural communities, it makes the stations much closer. If you have a way of getting from your home on a safe cycling infrastructure, you don't need to rely on the bus that's coming maybe once an hour or however many times. You have safe cycling infrastructure to get you to the station you need to get to, and then from there you should have rails and trains to get you wherever you need to go. But ultimately, these are big picture stuff. If we can't even get HS2 through the roof, where is the hope? And I think it's for me personally, that was a travesty. That was embarrassing.
Thank you.
Just to echo quite a bit of what's been said, but I suppose a human insight, which is people will often contact us living with asthma, living with COPD or another lung condition. This is at Asthma and Lung UK, and say, kind of, what can I do? And so the advice that we would give from a health perspective, if there's a high pollution day, and you want to go out and about, perhaps do that first thing in the morning, or take your children to school on a back route, a quiet route to school, so you're avoiding busy roads. So we can give advice at local level. We work with lots of communities in schools and other areas. And there is a place for that, of course. Likewise, regional action, we're working with lots of cities. But fundamentally, the way to tackle this problem is to rewire and to be bolder in our national approach. So I think you need activity at every level, but I think without a bolder national ambition, we're not going to achieve the sort of change we want.
Thank you. Yeah, on a very specific point about revenue, I think just on ULEZ, for example, every single penny that's not used for the maintenance of the scheme is put into public transport. And it's a very important point because you do need to increase the capacity, the availability, and as I said earlier, the affordability as well in order to provide that incentive. But we've talked a lot about carrots and sticks. And I think, when I said earlier that there's no pain-free option, we also need to recognize that in the transformation that is necessary, there is going to be a lot of frustration along the way, and the balance between carrots and sticks might have to change accordingly. I think the most important thing is to ensure that we are bringing as many people with us as possible. There's no point in having an agenda that alienates vast quantities of people for whom this would be a massive benefit, but they just don't get it, they don't understand it, and not without good reason, because people don't like being told what to do, they don't like being told that they're wrong, and it certainly shouldn't be the job of politicians to do that. We have to provide that right balance, and I think that balance will change and it will shift over time.
On that note, actually, I wondered whether you could perhaps both of you reflect a little bit on the way that you have implemented policies. So the Welsh Roads Review did get some pushback, but nothing like what we saw for ULEZ or for the 20-mile-per-hour zone. And I wonder, and there have been ebbs and flows in responses to initiatives in London. And I wondered if you could talk, and I'm sure that both of you will have experienced this in your engagement with the public, about how do we do that, bringing the public along, especially if you're ending up having to lean a little bit more on the sticks rather than the carrots. Are there lessons that we could learn there?
Yeah, well, that's a biggie, isn't it? So I think Seb is spot on in that there are multiple things going on here, and it's hard. So clearly, as we've discussed, there are structural issues about the way that the system has been manipulated over 70 years. There are funding issues, and in an age of austerity, and that's not going to change anytime soon. That is a massive constraint. There's a skills, capacity, capability issue, which is a real barrier as well. But also, I think it's the cultural issue that we're really hitting up against. And then, obviously, the way that's weaponized by the media and by the right. And that's not going to change either. So my mantra is you've got to make the right thing to do the easiest thing to do, because people will do the easiest thing. And for 70 years, we've made jumping in a car to go to the shops the easiest thing, and everything else cumbersome. And until we turn that on its head, and that's right. We can't say to people with difficult, complex lives, you have to save the planet, because they'll say bugger off. We just need to make it easy. You need to take the pain out of it for them. But this debate we've been having on 20s is quite interesting, because the evidence on 20s is unassailable. Okay, this is not an issue of a lack of evidence, but rationale and facts will only take you so far. This is about feeling, it's about identity, it's about control, and that's hard, because that's not based on rational thoughts. And that, some of that is about politically for us to say, well, there's 20% of people over here, no matter what you do, they're going to set their hair on fire when you try to do anything with cars. Do we let them set our pace? Or do we accept that we're going to have to just face that? We're going to have to lead our way through that, because the consequences of not doing it are catastrophic. So let's just be clear. This is not an optional thing. Do we have the bottle to do it? Wouldn't it be nice? No, we're not in that situation. So, we do have to have the courage of our convictions to lead, but it has to be done sensitively. And this is where I think, what I think is a seductive fallacy that we hear a lot is that, well, you should get the public transport system right first before you introduce all these changes, which, it's a seductive argument, isn't it? But it's just not where we're at. That would be great. But, Copenhagen and Amsterdam didn't become where they are overnight. It took them a generation or more. And you have to do it bit by bit. And I think progress is going to be uneven. And there can be times when you have leaders popping up in various places who do have the courage to do it, and then they're going to go away and somebody else is going to come and they're not going to have the courage or the interest in it. And I think that we just have to accept that. That's why the system change is so important, because you change the wiring. So regardless of who comes next, you're on a different pathway and trajectory. So on the roads review, you're right, the pushback, we were prepared for much more pushback than there was. It's not. It's been weaponized politically. The Tories are saying we've banned roads, and we're ideological. What have I been called? Fanatics. So there's all that. But actually, what's really interesting, the professions were like, yeah, of course. We've been waiting for someone to say this. That's what I find really interesting about this. And, it's high stakes, isn't it? The politics of this. But my experience so far is, yes, there's a lot of nervousness amongst fellow politicians, and particularly PPCs are, having a hard time on 20s on the doorstep with some people, and that makes everyone jittery. Of course it does. But also, when we do these things, there are a bunch of people, the silent majority, who say, thank goodness someone's saying this, because we want. For too long, I think we've put all the action responsibility down to individuals to make changes, and actually, it's not. Of course, individuals have a part to play, but it's the structure that really shapes it. And so I think, say the professions have turned around and said, great, it's just infrastructure. We're engineers. We'll do something else if we can't do that. But I think we do need the collective will to accept that lots of people aren't going to like it, but lots of people aren't going to like 2 meters sea level rises either.
I think Lee said it all, to be honest. I'm in complete agreement. I mean, and this point about leadership and you say the silent majority, this is a very important one, because when you look at polling, when you look at questions that ask people about the kind of environment that they want in their locality, people generally want quieter, safer neighborhoods where people are able to play on the streets on occasion and cycle around and take those options. But they want the options there, and it's about changing that structure. It's about having the focus, if you like, of investment, as well as that, as I said, pole star of the target that drives all of the decision making. But ultimately, the majority of people do want to see action on air quality. It's about awareness, it's about leadership, and as Lee, you're absolutely spot on in terms of changing that culture. We've got 100 years of ingrained thinking, and it's going to take an awful lot to present an alternative.
Because also we've got to recognise that people are contradictions. There's a whole series of paradoxes here. So yes, people say we want the speed in our street to be slower, but they also want the street they drive on not to be slower. And the research is crystal on that, and so there's a real tension there. There's a guy in a professor of psychology in Swansea University called Professor Ian Walker, who's done a paper on what he's called motor normativity, which is fascinating. And you were making the point earlier about drinking dirty water and would you do that? And one of the things he posed in his paper, which is available online, it's only a short paper, is that he did some questionnaires when the wording was identical. I don't remember it exactly, but it was something like, do you think it's right that people can blow smoke into your face and damage your health? Like 80% no. Exact same wording. Do you think it's right that cars can put pollution into your face and damage your health? 20% thought that was different. So, we have normalized the adverse consequences of a car-centric culture, and that is now in our psyche. So this is as much about psychology and culture as it is about all those hard hat stuff I discussed. And I think, it's the storytelling, it's highlighting individual cases, which we do. That's so important.
Were you going to come in?
Yeah, I was just going to... Is this on? Yes. Okay. I was just going to come in on the, and Lee said it right at the end, actually, about the storytelling. So I did a lot of sort of facts. This is what the research says. There's the Goodwin curve right at the start. When I'm speaking in the media, when I'm speaking to the public, that's not my messaging, because really, who cares, right? It's the messaging is, this is going to make your life better. And ultimately, most people who live in cities and in towns can recognize that if everyone had a car, that is what causes gridlock. It is a miserable existence that you're sitting in traffic trying to get to work. You're getting furious because you can't move. It's not a humane or a nice or a pleasant way to live. And so the positive arguments need to win out. So what we do at Possible is we create stories, and we work with people who, we did this last year. We took 10 regular drivers, people who drove on an everyday basis. Most of these people were parents. Some of them were disabled. And we said, right, let's track your day-to-day journey. Like, go for a week. Let's see what you do. And then we said, okay, we're now going to ask you to not use your car. We will pay you to use any other sustainable alternative. You decide what you want to use: bus, e-scooter, bike. We got some people cycle training because some people couldn't ride a bike. We said we'll arrange to get you a cargo bike if you want, but you just can't use your car. You can use any other alternative. Car clubs was an alternative as well. Just don't use your car. At the end of it, 3 people sold their car because they were like, wow, I don't need it. I love cycling. This is amazing. It's opened up a whole world. Not everyone, it didn't work for everyone. There was a particular disabled woman who the buses were hell for her, absolutely hell. They aggravated her conditions. Interestingly, she found the e-scooters really lovely, but everyone who used the trial said what they recognized was they were using their car way more than they needed to, using their car for silly journeys like going round the corner to the shops for 5 minutes when actually it's like a 10-minute walk, and that's simple enough to do. Realizing that they'd gotten into a habit and it wasn't healthy. We then expanded that challenge out to the nation. We were like, here's all the resources we have. We got 1,000 people signing up to do the challenge, and we did a before and after survey, and 98% of people said they cut their car use through basically just trying. Now, my point here isn't that we should just focus on individuals. It's not about individuals. What we need is government to be actually setting the agenda and setting the vision. But what I'm saying is you need to pull out these stories, because often the right-wing press have a complete bias against anything to do with traffic reduction. There are factual errors being reported really just without any checking. It's really frustrating, actually. But we need to be pulling out these stories to show, actually, here is someone taking their kids to school, dropping them off, and the kids are enjoying it, and it's freezing, and it's in Leeds, but they're still doing it and having a great time. Those are the stories that need to be surfaced to change the narrative. But the structural stuff, that's got to come from government, and that's where we need leadership. We need a government that's basically saying, this is the direction, everyone. This is where we're going.
Can I just come in quickly again? Sorry. So I think that's brilliant. I agree with all of that. But I think also we need to be really careful we don't start preaching at people and moralizing. Because people's lives are different, and people have complicated lives, and some people have very complicated journeys, and this isn't going to work for everyone. And we're not saying everybody must use sustainable transport and never use their car, clearly. We're saying for most people, for most journeys, there is an alternative. So let's work with that. Let's not start with the hardest case study of, you go buy a bag of cement and drop your auntie off at the hospital and then go, clearly, you need a car for that, and that's fine. That's fine. Cars are fine, in moderation. So I think that's one point. You just need to be careful, to nuance the message, to tell some people who are really having hard things going on, we're not trying to make your life even harder.
Can I come back on that point?
Go on then.
Just very, very quickly.
I'm going to come back another
No, so I agree with you. The point there wasn't disabled people should get out of their cars. That wasn't, no. That wasn't what we were trying to do. But what we did do was we did a bunch of research with disabled people to say, right, what does a low-car future look like for you? And the key messaging that came out from that research was disabled people were basically saying, I would love to do more for the environment. Here's all the barriers I have. So what I'm asking is for everyone who doesn't have those barriers, can you please do more? So if you don't need to drive a car, can you stop using your car? Because it will make my life 10 times easier. And I think that was what was really important. But also the other thing is, people use disabled people in this argument as a way of going, so well, we can't decarbonise because think of all the disabled people, why don't you? But actually, disabled people are disabled because of the environments we've created. They're not actually disabled, but you give them the right infrastructure, you give them the right tools, they can move around just the same as everyone else. And there are currently disabled people who use adapted cycles and trikes and all sorts to get about. So and I agree with you. Whenever I talk about car-free cities, I don't mean a city with no cars at all. I'm always talking about a city where the car is used when it's the right tool for the job.
Yeah. Right. Okay. So, I'll shut up then. Just the emphasis on cities, because that's the other thing that because obviously whenever you come up with something, people are going to look for the extreme example to say that doesn't apply, so you therefore shouldn't do any of it. So we've discussed that one, and the other one then is we are a rural country. This is fine for the cities, but this is not going to work for the vast majority of people. Now we know that's rubbish, but that is a powerful argument. And so I think we also have to talk about what this looks like in rural areas, what modal shift looks like in sparsely populated areas. And it works perfectly well in rural Sweden and rural Switzerland and rural Germany, where they have a one bus service every hour for every village. It's about choices. So there's nothing inherently inevitable. This is not applicable in rural areas, but you're going to need a different suite of interventions in urban areas. So things like car clubs. Even in rural areas, most people still live in towns. So looking at radial routes for out to 10 kilometers from a town and encouraging use of e-bikes. There's a demand-responsive public transport. There's a whole suite of things that will work in rural areas. But I do think we need to segment that and not leave the rural bit off the debate, because it's not fair, but secondly, it's an easy stick for someone to say, well, yeah, that's all very well for you guys, but that's not going to work everywhere else.
Very briefly, I think to emphasise the point about storytelling and to pick up on your point, Lee, about we don't and we can't preach, and that won't work. So with the Healthy Air Coalition, we are this group of both charities and NGOs that bring an evidence base and try to bring sort of facts and what's the latest evidence to the table. But I think in my experience, kind of don't underestimate the power of emotion and storytelling. And we work a lot in local communities and have done. Often the energy comes from a single person, a single story, a family that have lost someone, or someone struggling with their asthma, or there's a car park that is proposed to be built next to a school, and you have a school community kind of get together. So I think the power of that energy, emotion, storytelling, and I think too often it doesn't get a sort of equal billing around the table. So one of the things we've been trying to do in Manchester in discussions with Andy Burnham is bring to the table local residents who are struggling with the realities of living in a highly polluted city and feel as though their voice isn't being heard as much as others. Just one other brief point about political leadership. For many years, I worked on tobacco control campaigns, and the kind of arc was they were popular-ish, or some of them weren't that popular. If there was leadership to drive them through, they got normalised and they become popular pretty quickly. People get used to them. So, I did a lot of work on the smoking ban, and by the time the legislation was passed, the majority of the public were in support, but there wasn't a huge majority. Can any of us imagine now, kind of life pre-smoking ban? So I think my point is sometimes you do need political leadership, and we have seen that in parts of the country, and you see the positive impact. Yes, you've got to be careful, and you've got to take people with you, and you can't preach too much, and you've got to recognise complexity and difference. But sometimes, and I think this is what we really want as a Healthy Air Coalition, we want that bravery, courage and political leadership, because that's how you get this rewiring and you get the national bold action we need over the line.
I could carry on asking you all questions, probably for a couple of hours, but there's a room full of people. I'm going to take questions in groups of 3, and I'm going to try and encourage people to do questions rather than comments, because there's lots of people. let's go over here. You had your hand up pretty quick, and then you, and I'll come to you afterwards. Do you want to go first? And my colleague Jamie's running around with a mic.
Thanks, Maya. Thanks for the whole panel. I want to pick up on what Lee was saying about rewiring the system. And in particular in Wales, I'm really curious about the role of the Wellbeing and Future Generations Act and the Future Generations Commissioner to kick off the roads review back when there was the M4 Newport decision, and then that swung. I'm just curious on your perspective, how important do you think that act and that commissioner has been a few years ago in Wales being able to do the roads review today? Thanks.
Thanks very much. Hi, I'm Neil Wallace of the Zemo Partnership, formerly the Low Carbon Vehicle Partnership, though I have other hats as well. First of all, I'd just like to say in terms of the systemic change that Lee mentioned, it's a great privilege to have two such brave and committed leaders on this panel, and I'd like to applaud you both in what you're doing for this agenda. My question is, the Prime Minister is obviously weaponising this whole agenda. What's the most effective way to continue progress and counter that? Is it all about better communications, or is there more to it?
And then it was
hello, everybody. I'm from Lewisham. I'm the councillor, and I'm cabinet lead for the environment and climate crisis in Lewisham. I totally agree that you need absolutely really brave leadership, and I'm being asked to do that on a daily basis, and it's really tough out there. And I've just come from a really interesting discussion on AI. I feel like I need more help with data. Data is, I get the story stuff, I really do, we use it all the time, but I need data, and I wonder how we could start possibly using AI in a positive way to kind of pull together data and actually start doing really, really intelligent mapping, so that I can see, if I put an LTN in an area, I would be able to actually see how that data changes over a period of time and how we map that all together. And because, we know that these things work, but we've got to be able to explain this in a rational way to our residents. And at the moment, I feel there's a real gap there.
Thank you all. Does anyone want to come in? Did you want to come in first?
Yes, just on the political point about what do we do about the Tories. I'm tempted to say, ignore them. They're talking bollocks, and people know it. It's not cutting through. People can see what they're up to. They're energising their own cohort because that's all they've got to go with. But I think there's a real danger that we bend in reaction to this and knock us off course. We know what we need to do. So it's really irritating. Trust me, I get really irritated by it. But I think we need to give people, the public, a degree of credit for being able to see what's going on here. On the Future Generations point, so we've got this act. We like doing first things in Wales. We're less good on the follow through, but we like the first thing. So we've got a Future Generations Act, which effectively says that it's a framework where decisions have to be made, and you have to collaborate, and you have to think about the long term, and so on. And it's a good framework. And then we have a commissioner whose job it is to enforce that and to be the voice of the person who's not yet been born. And it's a good framework. I don't think we should overclaim what is done in terms of individual decisions. The roads review and the M4 was not because of the Future Generations Commissioner. It was because Mark Drakeford, as First Minister, cancelled the M4, and I came along and did the roads review. But it's a helpful framework, but ultimately there's no substitute for being willing to take difficult decisions. And I completely agree on the importance of data. Monitoring and evaluation is critical, and we don't do enough of it to be able to give us the evidence to prove to people that the counterintuitive actually works. Because back to that car-centric mindset we've had. We're programmed to think this stuff won't work, and the data shows it does, and that is really powerful.
Just very briefly, I couldn't agree more with the data point, and actually lots of beneficiaries, people that we're supporting with lung conditions, the thirst to understand at a granular level what the air quality is like in my community where I live. So I think both to help people understand and to raise awareness, and then secondly to make the case, I think is incredibly important. Just on the point about comms, because I suppose I tend to agree with Lee. I might not say it in those words, but I tend to agree. However, I mean, and Seb, I'm sure you can speak to this. I mean, we did quite a lot of work around ULEZ expansion, and I think various myths sort of grew up, and it's partly because of the sort of relentless media. So people just seemed, certainly in my experience, to overestimate the scale of the numbers that were going to be affected. And I think then there is a time and a moment for kind of cool, calm, collected, let's just keep our, what we know to be true, what we know the facts to be, but to make sure that we are trying to meet this kind of tide and wave of, quite frankly, lies at times, because I think there is a risk that lots of people who aren't paying much attention but just sort of hear the background noise slightly get the wrong end of the stick about some of this.
Yeah, sorry. On that, I mean, the work, Sarah, that you and others and Hirra that you do is absolutely essential, because that flow of data, the unarguable science. I mean, we can frame a narrative and we can do all sorts of things about the story we tell, but science is science. The impact of air quality on people's health is a fact. It's undeniable and it's proven. And it's essential that we have that pressure continually. And I appreciate there will be times, and the leadership point. Thank you very much for some might say that makes shows a difference of labour in power, but wouldn't be for me to comment surely on that. But yes, thank you for that point on leadership. But that leadership does require the backing of the data, the raw facts and figures on which the policy can be based. One thing I would say about challenging some of this tide of dare I say, nonsense that we have to face every day is casting our minds back to a time before politics was so polarized and the culture war was raging. It wasn't that long ago, but if we can think back to such halcyon times, there's a lot of written material from people who are currently saying very many things in opposition to many of these policies. There is a lot of written material where they express support for the kinds of policies that we're introducing. So I think a bit of homework as well that we need to do in order to expose some of the nonsense that is being said, because once upon a time there was a bit more of a consensus across the political divide on this. Unfortunately, certain elements have chosen to weaponize it in this instance, but as I say, there's a wealth of material out there to fight back with.
Did you want to come in on that one?
Yeah, I guess the only thing that I wanted to add was how, whilst we're kind of talking about the narrative, the culture, but as the lady over here just said, there are real-world consequences for people. We've had death threats in the Healthy Air Coalition for our, I get the hate that I get on social media is wild. Counsellors are experiencing real death threats. It's toxic, and it needs to stop. And I expect better from really across the board. But the real danger is when the other side weaponizes it. I'm not hearing the right kind of noises from the other side either. I mean, you guys are on doing really great on this agenda. Thank you very much. But what happened after the Oxbridge by-election? I'm still annoyed and fuming about that. Okay, it's complete. A couple of hundred votes, which I don't think Labour were going to win anyway, has completely changed the narrative on net zero. And I don't know what the Labour thinking is there from the leadership, but it's damaging on the local level. It's damaging for the people who are doing this work. It feels really undervaluing of the work that we're doing and the hard work that's being put in. So it has wide-reaching ramifications, is what I would say. And on the data point, I don't really know that much about AI. Can't comment. But echoing what was said is I think the data's fantastic for people who are already on board and are doing the work. It's important for them to have it. I'm not convinced that's how you win the argument, though. I don't think that helps bring people to us. I mean, we all like to think we're rational, but we're actually very contradictory and complex. And yeah, so I think stories is where we should kind of head towards.
Thank you all. Should we have another 3 questions? I know you had your hand up And then let's go to you there, and then back there. Come to you afterwards.
Thank you. Brett of Builders Merchants Federation. The headlines are grabbed by petrol and diesel cars and vans, but actually the far more serious problem is commercial transport and HGVs. How are we going to decarbonise that? I mean, in my case, as the name suggests, I don't have any choice. Your bricks, your cement, your timber, your glass, but also obviously people like Asda, M&S, you know, how does Next get their clothes around? So the question is, what is Labour's policy, or what should it be, to decarbonise HGVs? Because I've been here a day and a half and I still don't know, and I've been asking around. Is it HVO? Is it compressed natural gas? Is it hydrogen? How do we decarbonise heavy transport, for which the target currently, under the other lot, is 2035 for a certain tonnage, and for the heavier tonnage is 2040. What is, or should be, Labour's policy in front of the electors? Thank you.
And then just there, Jamie.
Hi, thank you for a really fabulous discussion and debate, and agree with a lot of the comments being made. Labour have committed to introducing a new Clean Air Act if they become the next government. I'd be really interested to hear from each of you one thing you'd like to see in that act.
Thank you very much. Robert Gwynn from Volta Trucks. The Mayor of London has recently announced that the plan for a zero emission zone in central London will not go ahead. But sticking to the theme of commercial vehicles, is there an opportunity to implement a zero emission zone just for commercial vehicles, where the impact of zero emission transport can be the largest in removing toxic fumes from our cities? And of course, this can be replicated in other cities. And then just a very quick follow-up to that. Specifically for Seb, could the cleaner vehicle discount for HGVs be extended past December 2025 to continue to encourage operators to make that transition to electric vehicles? Thank you.
Who would like to lead with that? I love it when the questions are sort of themed accidentally. Do you want
to? Yeah, just on the specific, obviously we'll look at any and every proposal that encourages the transition. Obviously I'm not going to say yes or no right now, but yes, I would certainly take that. Maybe a follow-up to discuss that, more than happy to. I'm going to disappoint you as well, I'm afraid, because I can't speak to national policy or indeed Labour Party policy on decarbonising freight. But what I would say from a London perspective is that obviously we do need a very joined-up national approach. I would argue we need a joined-up international approach as well, and it's important to look at what the European Commission is doing, for example, in its strategy on hydrogen versus electric when it comes to heavy goods. I'm going to slightly put on my former hat as a member of the European Parliament to say that targets do work. They do encourage industry to innovate in a way that is ostensibly technology neutral, but what happens over time is it becomes clearer what the most sustainable in terms of production capacity and indeed affordability becomes more obvious what those options are over time. There are increasing options out there for extremely high capacity, heavy goods vehicle, non-road mobile machinery as well to be electrified. And that would also apply, I think, to commercial vehicles as well, where the technology is improving all the time. But you know, we are at a bit of a juncture where it's not yet clear what the most obvious option would be. All I'd say on hydrogen, of course, is that there are different types of hydrogen. It would have to be green hydrogen, obviously, to achieve the greatest outcome on decarbonisation. There was another point which I've completely forgotten, but it might enter my head later on.
Let's do the freight, and then I'll ask, and then you can all go through your idea for what you want in the Clean Air Act. We'll have them all together.
I can answer that now.
If you've got it there, go ahead.
Oh, unless you want to do it as one. Let's do it as one.
Excellent. So freight, I think, is a neglected area of policy. And I'm not surprised you've been getting no answers to your questions, because it's not exactly top of the political priority list. Partly because it's really hard, and there are no glib answers to give you. So my instinct on it, and I had a really good roundtable with the freight industry just a couple of weeks ago, is that we should focus on the things we can do fastest and have greatest impact first. That doesn't include freight. So I think we should be looking at modal shift more generally, and accept that freight is going to move at a slower pace. The technology is still evolving. There's been trials of green hydrogen rubbish lorries, for example, that haven't worked because they just haven't had the power, the torque to get up the hill, and they're really expensive. And I think there's just as a pragmatic politician dealing with tough budget choices, I would rather plant the seeds in the fertile soil first rather than try and till the hardest land first. But in parallel, we absolutely need to be looking at how we can use last mile delivery, how we can look at putting more freight on rail, and also then look at more efficient vehicles as the technology comes cheaper and more affordable, and the power grid is able to catch up with the needs for charging infrastructure, which is a massive issue. We haven't got a national grid. It's neither national nor a grid, and that is a massive neglected challenge we have of electrifying our fleet. So I think there are things we can do and we are looking at, but I don't think that's at the front end of where do we start, is my honest answer.
Does everyone want to do your thoughts on the Clean Air Act? What you'd put in if you could choose one thing to go in? That was your question, wasn't it? Yeah.
My mind's I've reached for it and I was like, my mind's gone blank. It's really, really important. We know what happened with LPC Deborah. We know what's going on with who's the 9-year-old who was the first person who had toxic air listed as cause of death or contributing to her death. And we know how many people die every year prematurely because of toxic air. So I think the understanding that clean air is a human right is something that I would like and that kind of shifting that understanding of clean air. And it's sort of like this government was taken to court, kicking and screaming 3 times before we were able to say, right, okay, it is on you. You've got to ensure that residents are breathing clean air. And that's where we then got clean air zones kind of mandated through this government and why they're being rolled out. But so I think that shift of focus as clean air as a human right. And I was going to start talking about PM 2.5s, but I think Sarah's the expert, so I'm going to let her do that.
Yeah, so we're taking through a clean air bill through our parliament now, and Sarah's colleagues have been really helpful and constructive and challenging in taking that through. I think the WHO targets are extremely difficult to do, and I think we absolutely should stretch and challenge ourselves, but we should also understand the knock-on consequences of that. I think personally take us of a more segmented approach to dealing with what you've just mentioned first, rather than going straight into tackling levels of ammonia, which is going to cause all sorts of political pushback. So I think we need a degree of political intelligence to how we do that. But to answer your question directly, I've come under pressure and conceded to it to put in an amendment to include a duty to promote the air quality value of active travel for public bodies as part of our bill. And we're working out with the campaigners how we can word that legally in a way that's going to be effective. But I think that would be a good thing to include in the UK Act as well for bodies to have to show practically how active travel can help specifically with clean air.
Thank you.
Well, we are clear that we would like to see bolder air pollution targets enshrined in legislation. I think targets do galvanise action. So we would like to see a bolder clean air law that is very clear about kind of direction of travel to meet World Health Organization guidelines. But to pick up on Lee's point, I think it must go hand in hand with kind of the means to get there. So I think investment in public transport and support for people to make better, cleaner transport choices, either by active travel or by switching their vehicle via a scrappage scheme, is what we would love to see.
This is going to sound like bitterness. It's slight bitterness, mostly sadness, let's put it that way. But one of the first pieces of legislation I worked on as a member of the European Parliament was the National Emissions Ceiling Directive, which a lot of blood, sweat and tears were expressed in the passing of that and late nights in trilogues with the Commission and the Council. But anyway, that now protects citizens across a very wide area, 27 countries plus single market member states. And I would like to see a commitment that we meet or exceed the targets that that this government have decided to opt out of. There's lots they haven't opted out of, but the National Emissions Ceiling Directive is unfortunately one of them. And as the European Commission continues to improve and augment it, I think we should either match it or, as I say, exceed it.
Thank you very much. I think we might have time for 2 more questions. And you 2 at the back there had put your hands up. Oh, hang on, I said that you could do it. We'll do 3 here, then the person at the back, and then you standing there. But we'll just keep them short. It was this gentleman here.
Thank you. Trevor Mewton, Councillor Trevor Mewton from Brighton Hove City Council, Chair of Transport Sustainability Committee. My point is really, to win the argument, you've got to deliver well. And what we found in taking over the administration in our city is that the Green Party did not deliver well. They failed the city by doing very poor delivery of active travel. Disability activists actually ended up boycotting the Inclusive and Active Travel Forum. And the air quality's got worse over the duration of their administration. So what we're now set up with is behind the curve. We're trying to now step up forward. But what we saw in the local elections, where the Green Party were almost obliterated from our city, is that they were rejected on the basis of LTNs and very poorly designed and followed through active travel schemes. And so we're absolutely committed to try and deliver those better and to do them well, to win the argument based on the quality of delivery, and then for the residents to see how they can engage well with that process. So that's one of the key points I want to make. Thank you.
Thanks very much. My name's Katie Roberts. I formerly worked at Sustrans, and I am now at Islington Council in the Participation and Engagement team. So you've talked a lot about the kind of opposition that you're facing in putting through these policies, the way that the right-wing press whips up a lot of culture wars around it, and the need for bold leadership encouraged to push policies through so that we can enable a shift from car-centric culture. And I have a question around co-design and working with communities on designing those schemes locally. I promise I'll keep this really brief, but in my time at Sustrans, I worked with the London Borough of Redbridge on pushing through their 5 low traffic neighbourhoods. Spoiler alert, the scheme was pulled within a few weeks of it being rolled out. It was pushed through at an exceptional time during COVID, where we were able to have emergency traffic orders put in place, but we were only allowed to inform residents 1 week before the schemes were implemented. And what this meant was, so the schemes were designed just using Google Maps with no local knowledge because there was no resource put into that on-the-ground community building, understanding how things worked. I could give a lot of examples, but one that kind of really stuck with me was when I was putting up posters a week beforehand, a very distraught businessman came out, obviously already kind of very upset about what COVID was doing to his business and like fear for his family and his future. And he said that the modal filter that we were putting in near his business was going to separate his shop front from his warehouse. I told him the scheme was definitely going to go ahead, but there was a possibility of moving where the modal filter was going to be, and would that make a difference? And he visibly relaxed. He said he'd still oppose the scheme, he was still going to pursue legal action, but it would make a massive difference to him. And so I was then able to go back to our engineering team, and we moved where that modal filter was going to be. As I said, the scheme was pulled within a few weeks. So in terms of taking that bold leadership, pushing the policies through that we know need to happen, what is the role for co-designing local solutions and schemes? And how can we make sure that this is funded and resourced and valued?
You've hit the theming thing again. So Ian O'Donnell from the Federation of Small Businesses. I'm a massive advocate of low carbon travel. I cycle everywhere. But talking to small businesses, many of them are very anti-LTNs. They really struggle with the benefits. They really struggle with understanding how it's going to impact them. They believe a lot of the stories they see. My plea and my question is, how do we create more stories about the benefits to them? How do we evidence it? Because actually they do want to see the data, but there is a sparsity at the moment of good data on how LTNs can benefit them economically. I know they do. And thirdly, how do we co-design with them? Because that is one of the issues. Often they are not talked to adequately. And finally, also on delivery, often the schemes, for example, putting in the cycle lanes, they seem to be right on the slow burn for the length of time they take to do compared to equivalent road schemes. And so they're impacted actually from sometimes up to 2 years on the construction. And to be honest, for a micro business, that means they've gone bankrupt in the length of time that there's been disruption.
Thank you very much. Do you want to go ahead?
Well, I think there's a really interesting theme through all those questions. And I talked earlier about some of the structural barriers we face. One of them is skills, capacity and capability amongst the delivery organisations. Local authorities in particular have been hollowed out because of austerity. The culture in highways departments in local authorities is very much car focused. So even if they had the will to do it, and many don't, they often struggle to find the way because they just haven't got the experience or the bodies. I think Active Travel England in creating a centre of excellence is a really important step forward there, and clearly the cuts to the active travel budget in England are foolish. But I guess I don't know the situation in Brighton, but the execution is, as you say, critical. Active travel in particular is only as strong as the weakest bit of infrastructure, because if you're trying to persuade people who've never before cycled to try it, they are going to be discouraged every time they come across something that discomforts them. And so that level of granular detail is critical for having something that's going to work and be accepted and be embraced by the naysayers, because success speaks for itself. And that we got real struggle there. So the point about community engagement is a really important one, and that's an issue of resources, and it's an issue of skill sets. Because if we are asking highway engineers to do community engagement, which is what effectively we do, you predictably get terrible results because that's not their culture. That's not what they're about. They just want to build stuff. They don't want to talk to people. So we need to value the importance of community relationships and consultation and co-design, and just the resource isn't in the system there to do that, nor the skills to do that. That's a specific valued skill set that our current level of professions just haven't been had to have before. So that's really important. And then that goes just to, sorry to shut up, I'll shut up. But finally, on the structural point of this is all down to, so again, back to the hard wiring. The Treasury rules we have in making a distinction between capital and revenue is a real barrier. It's a really nerdy accounting point, but it's a huge issue in how we implement behaviour change programs, because all this stuff is about people, investing in people, and not just investing in building. And there is, in transport, it's easier to get money to build than it is to get people. And that is a real constraint for us. It's a really boring point, but it's a really systemic problem in how we do the doing that we need to do to get this shift. And that's really got to be looked at a UK level.
Thank you very much. Did anyone else? Did you want?
Yeah, no, just on the quality of infrastructure point, I think this is really crucial. And it is absolutely the case that if you have poor quality, not properly segregated cycle lanes that abruptly end or deposit you at a junction, then obviously if your first experience of cycling is that, then you're going to be put off. So it is very important that the quality and design, which will never be got right the first time, it is unfortunately a process that does require some element of trial and error, although to be fair, most of that has now been done, so we know what works and what doesn't in the main. But one thing I would say is that the pandemic did provide an opportunity to put infrastructure in at relatively short notice, which was not up to the kind of standard that would befit a long-term network, particularly on the cycling network. But that opportunity should nonetheless not be overlooked, and the impact that the short-term investment had, which then led to long-term improvements to that network, was very important. So it's important to get the quality right, but don't overlook any opportunities that might come about in the meantime. Just on the co-design point, this is this is critical. It's something of an accident, I suppose, of London government that we have 32 plus one boroughs that necessitate a high degree of interaction between the overall authority in TfL and the borough level as well, but it's extremely useful. We don't always get it right. I'm not going to pretend that relationship always works perfectly. Of course it doesn't, but actually it does provide a very good opportunity to have the structures in place at TfL to enable that co-design to take place. And as Lee rightly says, it's about the resourcing, the skilling, and ensuring that you have that expertise at every level. But at least the structure, or the beginnings of the structure, is there when it comes to the relationship that TfL has with the boroughs. And you know, it's so important to get all of those aspects. I would say that co-design, though, is not just about planning, it's also about many of the different policy objectives we have on a whole range of areas. For example, step-free access. If you have a step-free access program that is designed by able-bodied men of a certain height, then it's not going to work properly. You need to have that co-design process throughout all of your aspects of change and delivery and infrastructure planning.
Did you want to come in quickly?
Yeah, I think, you know, this was a big one. The LTNs and the traffic calming measures that were put in during COVID coincided with a really tricky time for business. And so it's actually, whilst in small businesses' brain the two are connected, it's actually really hard to figure out, well, is your business failing just because it was COVID and it's been a really, really tough time and people have stopped going to the high streets as much and people, you know, order things online? All of these different things are coalescing. So I think, you know, we recently did a report about small businesses in Hackney and the impact. And most of them, yes, were not in favour of that scheme because they felt it was damaging to their business. One gentleman was in favour, but explicitly on because of the environmental reasons. He understood the environmental imperative. And his argument, he was very critical of Hackney Council because what he said was, actually, if Hackney Council just said, we're doing this because of the environment, and rather than saying this is going to help your business, when actually you don't know, you can't guarantee that. Small businesses are struggling across the board. So actually just be very honest and be like, actually, we're not doing this because it might help your business. It might not. There is some evidence that, you know, pedestrianising high streets increases revenue. It means people spend longer on the high street. We can't guarantee it, but the reason we're doing it is for the environment. This particular gentleman felt that the council were a little bit underhanded on that. I can't comment on whether the council were or were not. I wasn't there, but that was his viewpoint. So that's why it's going to be hard, I think, to win on the business front. You can make the argument that high streets are just nicer to be in because they're pedestrianised. People do spend longer, and that's the kind of argument you can make. But I think fundamentally small businesses are struggling. That's a much bigger issue and a much bigger cause that isn't really about transport, if we're being honest. And then on co-design. Yes, I think co-design, really, really important. Consultations, really, really important, particularly with those who are underrepresented or, particularly with disabled people's groups. But my one word of caution is that, of course, consultations are not supposed to be referendums. They're not votes. And as I said in my kind of opening bit, you're not going to please everyone. The reality is you can't. There is no magical scheme that everyone's going to love because it's just somehow adjusted to their specific needs. There are going to be people who aren't going to like it. And what happens when you have those people who are really, really vocal? They're a tiny minority, but they really, really don't like it. I think that's where you need to have strong leadership that can basically stand firm on that. Do you want to?
Very briefly, I mean, I think those three questions have kind of laid down the challenge to the community, really, or those themes. We have to do these things well. We have to take people with us, and we have to really robustly evaluate and share the data and the knowledge and the best practice. A very personal reflection. I live in London. In my part of London, there is a highly contentious LTN. And the cycling infrastructure is really crap. So I've got small kids. I don't trust them to cycle on the roads, the main roads, which are now, well. So the problem is, at local level, it's become incredibly binary. Let's reverse the LTN rather than let's improve, let's improve the cycling infrastructure, let's have a vision for the future, let's incrementally improve. And I think that's also where we need to get to. So I mean, I think someone was making the point earlier, you do have to take opportunities, and you know, COVID clearly was an opportunity to do some of these things quite quickly. I think now the narrative really should be, okay, we've made a start. How do we make this better? How do we ensure that businesses can flourish? How do we improve the infrastructure so that everyone is able to benefit in the way that we've kind of sold some of these things? But I think you've brilliantly set out the challenge of take people with us, evaluate robustly, and co-design.
And I think, given the time, we should end there. Please join me in thanking all of my panellists.